Square Enix recently released two major titles in the Final Fantasy universe, Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. Now, there's no denying that both of these games are high quality. I mean, looking at the Metascore here, both Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth have great scores from critics and users and players and customers alike. These are great games, and people are hoping that they'll succeed and drive further growth for the Final Fantasy series. But there's been a lot of debate as to whether these games are selling well enough. Like, we know they've sold a couple million copies, but the total sales versus what the expectations are at Square Enix, those are two different metrics. Like, millions of copies sold is pretty good, but what was Square Enix expecting to sell, and how does Square Enix judge success for these games? Well, based on recent reports, it looks like Square Enix is not happy with the sales of both of these games. While they sold millions of copies, they did not meet internal expectations, and in turn, shareholders and investors are not happy, which is why in a recent report by Bloomberg, it was stated that Square Enix shares tumble by most in 13 years on a weak outlook. And it states right here that sales of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Final Fantasy 16, and Foam Stars all released exclusively for PlayStation. There seems to be a commonality for Square Enix games that they make PlayStation 5 exclusive. All of these fell short of the Japanese game publisher's expectations in both revenue and profit, and this is something that Square Enix CEO Takashi Kiryu confirmed with analysts. The company now expects to earn an operating income of 40 billion yen this year, widely missing the average of analyst estimates of 57 billion yen. And obviously the end result is that the stock price fell. A lot of investors pulled out, not seeing growth that would also allow their money that they invested in the company to grow. So shares in Square Enix fell by their daily limit on Tuesday to a 4-month intraday low. Takashi Mochizuki, who wrote and edited this article, added additional context via the following tweet where he noted that Final Fantasy 16 sales overall fell short of expectations, while initial momentum was in line with expectations. The initial 3 or so million copies that the game sold within its launch week, the game failed to reach financial year goal as its momentum slowed. No updates from sales number last announced at 3 million. And then Final Fantasy VII Rebirth sales just overall fell short of expectations. Initial momentum didn't reach an internal target. No sales numbers were shared. And then Foam Stars, the Splatoon-like, if you will, that also fell short of expectations. Initial momentum didn't reach an internal target. No sales number to share. Now, Square Enix does apparently expect that in the long term, over the course of 18 months, Final Fantasy 16 will achieve its goal. And also, apparently, it's not that the sales of Rebirth and Foam Stars and FF16 are like disasters. They're not complete flops or necessarily bad. They just didn't meet certain expectations that would allow the company to gain the kind of revenue and profit they were expecting to make investors happy, to show that the company was growing, and to allow their stock price to either remain stable or sort of steadily go up. These results have caused Square Enix to sort of reprioritize and reorganize. For example, it is stated here that they reorganized the development team into 5 console teams and 1 smartphone game team, and they're kind of trying to prioritize quality over quantity, just kind of spending more time with a few projects instead of, aiming to spread themselves too thin with a bunch of projects at the same time. Square Enix also believes that they've relied too much on an individual's creativity and will therefore promote sharing game-making how-how among teams, and will seek best balance of individual creativity and organizational discipline. It was also confirmed that Dragon Quest XII is still under development. That will likely be their next major release. And then when it comes to how investors reacted to all of this, shares fell. But beyond that, they expressed concerns about pipelines and how they might have become too empty. No big titles that can lift up the company's top line over the next couple of years. In terms of mainline Final Fantasy games, we'll have to wait quite a number of years for Final Fantasy 17 and also Final Fantasy 7 Remake's final entry in that trilogy. That'll take a couple of years before it comes out. Final Fantasy 14 is still doing well, and there's a new expansion coming for that. but investors want more than just Final Fantasy 14 expansions. They want to see all of these other projects also take off and achieve the kind of success that will allow the company and in turn the shareholders' investments to grow with it. Now, one other way that Square Enix is trying to make up for recent lackluster financial performance is by foregoing PlayStation exclusivity for some of their biggest titles. As reported by Bloomberg here, the publisher is also departing from its practice of releasing its top-tier games first on PlayStation and will make them available to as many platforms as possible, including Nintendo's platforms, Microsoft's platforms, and PC. This, I think, was the biggest way that they shot themselves in the foot with Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. Final Fantasy 7 Remake did perform pretty well as sort of a PlayStation exclusive that eventually came to PC, but that was at the height of PS4 sales when the user base was at over 100 million. It was also during COVID that Remake was released, and so it had more ideal circumstances where they could kind of take the risk of exclusivity. But with PlayStation 5 sort of having half the user base of PlayStation 4 right now, and with kind of the economic downturn that has happened recently, and with COVID now going away and lockdown no longer being a thing, and just people not spending as much on video games as they did during the pandemic, their expectation of Final Fantasy 16 and 7 Rebirth being able to kind of match their internal expectations under those circumstances with PlayStation 5 exclusivity, it just seemed like a very far-fetched goal, and I think they shot themselves in the foot by kind of committing to PlayStation exclusivity. The fact that they're considering bringing these fantastic games to other consoles, I think is a big plus. Square Enix is a third-party publisher, and so I think the more accessible they make their games, the more consoles and platforms they release those big titles for, the more everyone will benefit. More people will be able to play these games. The franchise and IP will be able to spread further and wider, and Square Enix will just be able to make more money instead of confining themselves to a limited user base. I feel like this is just an important reality check for Square Enix. I've always found the Final Fantasy exclusivity for PlayStation just kind of dumb and unnecessary, and something that I felt like in the long term would come back to bite them in the ass, and it kind of did now. And so seeing them consider Xbox, and also, with Nintendo Switch 2, or the successor to Nintendo Switch, having been confirmed by Nintendo, and it likely being powerful enough to run games like Final Fantasy 7 Remake and Rebirth, and it being a platform that will likely sell pretty well if Nintendo supports it correctly, being able to expand that audience base to that degree, I think will allow these games to have a longer tail, and hopefully this is a consideration they'll have for Final Fantasy 17 and the last entry in the Final Fantasy 7 Remake trilogy, so that those games don't sort of end up not flopping, but just not meeting those internal expectations and sort of contributing to a negative outlook that Square Enix currently has among investors and among just general, games industry pundits looking at Square Enix and seeing that their performance is just not up to par, and it feels like they're kind of in a downwards trend. And I'm talking about a pretty significant downwards trend. The latest report is that their share price dropped by nearly 16% after announcing that every single recent major release, and we're not talking about just new IPs like Foam Star, but well-established franchises like Final Fantasy, both the new entry in the mainline series 16 and the 7 Remake Part 2, the fact that both of those also kind of seem to be struggling sales-wise and in terms of meeting expectations just doesn't bode well. Like, if their most well-known IPs can't meet sales expectations, then what can is kind of the question that's being raised. Now, with these less than ideal financial results, it should come as no surprise that we're going to see more freaking layoffs, as if there weren't enough of those this year. We're not even halfway through the year, and we are likely about to exceed 2023's entire total number of layoffs we saw that whole year. It's just, it's a travesty what's happening this year to the games industry. But yeah, Square Enix is set to make layoffs as part of its ongoing company restructuring. It told US and Europe-based staff in an internal meeting today, Video Games Chronicle understands. So that's something we can expect to hear more about over the coming days and weeks. And beyond that, to make up for some of their recent losses and to kind of adhere to their recent reorganization and reprioritization, Square Enix also seemingly canceled a number of unannounced projects because they don't fit with its new strategy. I hope among those canceled projects are those NFT games that Square Enix executives were so excited about and constantly put out there and touted with every New Year letter. But yeah, it's all part of what Square Enix calls their Square Enix Reboots and Awakens program and endeavor. And shifts include, plans to aggressively pursue a multi-platform strategy, a revamp of its internal development process to bring more capabilities in-house instead of outsourcing to third parties, so on and so forth. It does feel like Square Enix needs to revamp how they do things, so the fact that they are making such considerations might be a good thing. But ultimately, it's about execution, and it still sucks that we're seeing layoffs because of leadership's failures. But yeah, there was a lot of debate as to whether Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth were selling well. A lot of people were trying to defend its sales figures and numbers, but there were early indications that Square Enix was concerned about sales. Even before Final Fantasy 16's release, there were reports and rumors that Square Enix is panicking slightly over Final Fantasy 16 pre-order numbers. And then we'd see insistence from the likes of Takashi Mochizuki that Final Fantasy 16 sales were weak because of launching the game at $70 and PlayStation 5 only on a date where a lot of other great games are coming out. And he also highlighted how the game tumbled pretty hard on its second week. And even back in 2023, there were indications that FF16 was not meeting sales expectations, with President Kiryu saying that Final Fantasy 16 sales didn't meet the high end of the company's expectations, and PS5's installment base was a limiting factor. This is something that Square Enix admitted all the way back then, and now they're doubling down on admitting that by saying we got to stop doing PS5 exclusivity and make our games just as sellable as possible by ensuring that people across all platforms can buy our games, which just seems like the smart business strategy. Even back in 2023, Square Enix saw a major drop in revenue, profit, in its share price because of reports of Final Fantasy XVI's underperformance and the fact that a bunch of other projects underperformed as well. So 2024 marks a second time where Square Enix just showed a lack of growth and showed that the company is just kind of struggling right now. Back in September of 2023, this Bloomberg article, also by Takashi Mochizuki, warned that Final Fantasy makers' 30% plunge may be just the beginning of a company that's trending downwards. Keep in mind that all of this is also coming off of the shutdown of Marvel's Avengers, a live service that Square Enix had a lot riding on, and it just flopped epically because of its games as a service and kind of a looter style of gameplay that didn't suit the IP particularly well. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy also undershot sales expectations. This one's a shame because Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is a pretty good game that just I don't think was marketed as well as it could have been. Babylon's Fall, that was a travesty from Platinum Games, another attempt at a live service that utterly failed and that Square Enix suffered greatly for financially. Forspoken's launch sales were lackluster, another major attempt at a new IP that just backfired completely, that didn't really capture the hearts and minds of people. And then beyond that now, we got Foam Stars not doing particularly well. Final Fantasy 16 and FF7 Rebirth not flopping, but also not meeting expectations. It's just, we've seen better results from Square Enix in the past. And even with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, there were early indications that the game was underperforming sales-wise, something that analyst Daniel Ahmad got a lot of online abuse for, just for stating that because people just didn't want to believe it. But now, Takashi Kiryu is confirming that this is in fact the case. It just feels like Square Enix hasn't had a major win in a long time, and that doesn't speak to the talent at Square Enix or the quality of games like, FF7 Rebirth, which a lot of people love, myself included. It's a number of factors that contributed to that, including just dumb moves like making that stuff exclusive and just kind of limiting their ability to make money off of these games through deals that in the long term don't serve them well. And so to see them sort of shift and kind of change things and overhaul themselves a bit and reprioritize and say we're going full multi-platform for these major releases, that might potentially boost their numbers, and that might potentially, hopefully, mark a new beginning for a company that needs to do something different, because otherwise, this downwards trend will continue. But only time will tell what the future holds and whether these shifts in strategies and the way they're handling game development and teams and how they're going about making games and releasing games, if all of these things will ultimately contribute to a brighter future. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on Square Enix's situation right now, and whether you think their recent statements and their recent shifts in strategies will ultimately help, and if it makes you more optimistic about the company's future. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.